Millionaire fell in love with a waitress, but he tests the poor waitress before confessing his love and discovers something heartwarming. Ethan Cross was a man who seemed to have everything. His name was synonymous with wealth, success, and power, and his empire stretched across industries. From towering skyscrapers bearing his name to luxury brands that defined elegance, Ethan's influence was undeniable. But beneath the tailored suits and carefully curated image, he was a man plagued by a gnawing emptiness. Despite all his accomplishments, love had always eluded him. Real love, the kind that wasn't tainted by ulterior motives or driven by ambition. It was on an otherwise ordinary evening that fate decided to intervene. Ethan had stepped out of his office early for a change, deciding to wander through the streets of a neighborhood far removed from his world of penthouses and gala dinners. Dressed in a simple coat and jeans, he strolled unnoticed among the bustling crowd until the warm light of a small diner caught his attention. The inviting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling pancakes wafted through the air, stirring a sense of nostalgia he couldn't ignore. Inside, the diner buzzed with life. The clinking of plates, snippets of cheerful conversation, and the faint hum of a jukebox in the corner created a comforting symphony of ordinariness. It was here, in this unassuming little eatery, that Ethan's eyes fell on her. She was a waitress, weaving effortlessly between tables with a tray balanced in one hand and a smile that could light up the gloomiest of days. Her name tag read Lila. There was a grace to her movements, a kindness in her voice as she greeted customers, and an undeniable warmth in her laughter. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. She wasn't like the women he usually encountered at charity galas or business meetings. Lila was real. There was a raw, unfiltered beauty about her that stood in stark contrast to the polished perfection of his usual circles. She had a radiance that seemed to come from within, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt something stir in his chest. He returned to the diner the next day, and the day after that. Over the course of a few weeks, he learned small things about Lila from their brief conversations. She had dreams of becoming a writer and spent her free time scribbling ideas in a worn-out notebook. She had an ailing mother she cared for and worked double shifts to make ends meet. Despite her struggles, she always seemed to see the world through an optimistic lens. Ethan found himself drawn to her more with every passing day. Yet, a voice in his head held him back. Was this real, or was he just another wealthy man enchanted by the simplicity he could never have? And what if Lila's kindness was just a mask, like so many others he'd encountered? Determined to find the truth, Ethan decided to test her. The first test was small. He left a wallet stuffed with cash and cards on a table and watched from a discreet corner as Lila approached to clear it. Her brow furrowed as she opened the wallet, glancing around the diner. Instead of pocketing the money, she handed it to the manager, insisting they find the owner. Ethan couldn't help but smile at her honesty. But he wasn't satisfied. He needed to be sure her goodness wasn't superficial. The next test was more elaborate. Ethan disguised himself as a struggling artist, a role he played convincingly thanks to a few worn clothes and a borrowed beat-up car. He accidentally spilled coffee on himself while sitting at the counter and fumbled to pay for his meal, claiming he'd forgotten his wallet. Without hesitation, Lila pulled out her tips for the day and paid for him. "You didn't have to do that," Ethan murmured, genuinely moved by her gesture. "You looked like you could use a break," she replied with a shrug, her tone light but her eyes full of compassion. Ethan's heart ached at her selflessness, but he wasn't ready to stop testing her yet. The final test came on a rainy evening. Ethan staged a scene outside the diner, pretending to be stranded with a broken-down car. He waited in the cold, soaked to the bone, until Lila's shift ended. As she stepped out into the downpour, she spotted him. Despite being exhausted from a long day, she approached with concern, offering him her umbrella and staying with him until a tow truck arrived, an actor Ethan had hired to complete the ruse. As they stood together in the rain, Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. This wasn't just kindness. This was something deeper, a genuine, unselfish love for humanity that seemed to radiate from her very being. When Lila finally left that night, waving goodbye with a smile that melted his heart, Ethan knew he had his answer. But before he could confess his feelings, he realized something extraordinary about her, a truth he hadn't seen coming. Ethan sat in his car that night, the raindrops streaking across the windshield mirroring the turmoil in his heart. As he replayed every interaction he'd had with Lila, He couldn't help but marvel at her selflessness, her warmth, and her quiet strength. But there was something he hadn't noticed before, a subtle detail that clicked into place like the missing piece of a puzzle. Lila wasn't just kind, she was brave. Each act of generosity had come at a personal cost to her. Paying for a stranger's meal when she barely had enough for herself, staying out in the rain to help someone when she was clearly tired, and handing in a wallet full of money when she could have justified keeping it for her own needs. All these choices weren't just acts of kindness. They were sacrifices. The thought humbled him. He had tested her integrity, her compassion, and her character, but in doing so, he realized something deeper. Lila didn't act out of a sense of duty or to gain recognition. She acted out of love. Love for people, love for the world, and a steadfast belief in doing what was right. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. He needed to know why she was this way. What made her heart so big, her spirit so unbreakable? And above all, could someone like her truly love someone like him? A man whose life had been built on wealth, ambition, and a past filled with cold, transactional relationships? The next evening, Ethan found himself back at the diner. This time, he wasn't in disguise. He sat at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee, as he waited for Lila to finish her shift. When she finally approached him with her signature warm smile, he gathered the courage to ask, "Lila, can I walk you home tonight?" She blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting the request. "Oh, sure," she replied hesitantly, her cheeks flushing slightly. "But I warn you, it's not exactly the most glamorous neighborhood." "I'll take my chances," Ethan said with a soft chuckle, his heart pounding in his chest. As they stepped out into the cool night, Ethan noticed how Lila hugged her coat closer to herself, her breath visible in the chilly air. He wanted to offer her his coat, but something told him she would refuse, insisting she was fine. So, instead, he walked closer to her, hoping his presence might provide some warmth. They chatted as they made their way through the dimly lit streets. Lila talked about her love for books, her dream of writing stories that would inspire others, and her childhood memories of sitting by the window, scribbling in her notebook while the world outside seemed so much bigger than she could comprehend. Ethan listened intently, hanging on to every word. There was a sincerity in her voice that made him forget about the sprawling empire waiting for him back home. When they reached her small apartment building, Ethan hesitated. He didn't want the night to end. Summoning his courage, he asked, "Lila, can I ask you something?" "Sure," she said, tilting her head curiously. "Why are you the way you are? I mean, you give so much to others, even when you have so little. What drives you to be so selfless?" Lila's expression softened, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw a flicker of pain in her eyes. She leaned against the railing of the building's entrance and let out a small sigh. "I guess it comes down to how I was raised," she began. "My mom always told me that no matter how hard life gets, kindness is the one thing we can always afford to give. She sacrificed so much for me, and even when we didn't have much, she never hesitated to help others. I guess I just learned from her." Ethan's chest tightened. "She sounds like an incredible woman." "She is," Lila said with a faint smile. "But she's been sick for a while now. I'm doing my best to take care of her, but," her voice trailed off, and she quickly wiped at her eyes, as if embarrassed by her vulnerability. "Sorry, I didn't mean to dump all that on you." "You don't have to apologize," Ethan said gently. "If anything, I'm grateful you trusted me enough to share that." For a long moment, they stood in comfortable silence. Ethan wanted to tell her then and there how he felt, how much she had changed his world in such a short time. But the words caught in his throat. This wasn't the right moment. Not yet. "Thank you for walking me home," Lila said finally, her smile returning. "It was nice to have company for a change." "Anytime," Ethan replied, his voice laced with sincerity. "Good night, Lila." "Good night, Ethan." As he watched her disappear into the building, Ethan made a silent vow. He wasn't just going to confess his love to her. He was going to do everything in his power to ease her burdens, to show her that she deserved all the happiness in the world. But as Ethan began to devise a plan to help Lila, he had no idea that the heartwarming discovery he was about to make would not only change his life but also reveal a connection between them that he never saw coming. The following days passed in a blur for Ethan. He couldn't stop thinking about Lila, her resilience, her unwavering kindness, and the quiet strength that seemed to hold her together even when the world was crumbling around her. He knew he couldn't just stand by and watch her struggle. But he also knew that helping her wouldn't be as simple as throwing money at the situation. Lila was proud and independent. Any gesture of charity might hurt her more than help her. Ethan needed to be careful. He wanted to show her he cared, not just for her, but for the things that mattered most to her. First, he decided to learn more about her life. Over the next few days, he discreetly spoke to people around the diner, learning more about Lila's circumstances. Her co-workers described her as a ray of sunshine, someone who always stepped in to cover shifts even when she was exhausted herself. The manager, a kindly older woman named Margie, shared how Lila often spent her breaks writing in her notebook, pouring her heart into stories she dreamed of one day publishing. "She's been through a lot," Margie said with a sigh. "Her mother's been sick for a while now, and the medical bills are, well, you can imagine." But Lila never complains. She just keeps going, like she's got the weight of the world on her shoulders but refuses to let it show. Ethan's heart ached at the thought. He knew what he had to do. The first step of his plan was subtle. He arranged for an anonymous donation to cover Lila's rent for the next 3 months. He knew it wasn't a permanent solution, but it would give her some breathing room. The second step involved her mother. Ethan hired a private doctor, one of the best in the city, to visit Lila's apartment and provide a full assessment of her mother's condition, all under the guise of a free health program. He ensured the costs of any necessary treatments would be covered without Lila ever knowing who was behind it. But Ethan wasn't done. He wanted to do something for Lila herself, something that would nurture her dreams. After learning about her love for writing, he reached out to a friend who owned a publishing house and arranged for a meeting. He presented them with a copy of one of Lila's stories, which he'd found tucked inside a forgotten corner of the diner during one of his visits. His friend was impressed and agreed to mentor her, offering guidance on how to refine her work and navigate the path to becoming a published author. Everything was falling into place. Ethan felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. But even as he worked behind the scenes to ease Lila's burdens, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still hiding a part of himself from her. One evening, as he sat in his office overlooking the city skyline, Ethan realized it was time to come clean. He couldn't keep his true identity a secret any longer. If he wanted a real chance with Lila, she needed to know who he was, not just the man who walked her home or shared quiet conversations over coffee, but the billionaire whose life was a world away from hers. The next day, he returned to the diner, his heart pounding in his chest. Lila greeted him with her usual warm smile, but this time, there was a glimmer of curiosity in her eyes. "You seem nervous," she said teasingly as she poured him a cup of coffee. "Is everything okay?" Ethan hesitated, gripping the edge of the counter. "There's something I need to tell you," he began. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Lila tilted her head, her smile fading slightly. "Okay, what is it?" Taking a deep breath, Ethan looked her in the eye. "My name is Ethan Cross. I'm not just a guy who comes to this diner every day because I love the coffee. I'm the CEO of Cross Enterprises." Lila blinked, her expression a mix of surprise and confusion. "Wait, the Ethan Cross? As in the billionaire?" He nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "Yes. I didn't mean to deceive you, Lila. I didn't want you to see me for my money or my status. I wanted you to know me as a person, without all the noise that usually comes with my name." For a moment, Lila said nothing. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the coffee pot down. "Ethan, why are you telling me this now?" "Because I care about you," he said earnestly. "More than I've cared about anyone in a long time. I've seen how kind and selfless you are, and it's made me realize how much I want to be a part of your life. But I didn't want to build this connection on a lie." Lila stared at him, her expression unreadable. "So, all this time, you've been pretending to be someone else?" "I wasn't pretending," Ethan said quickly. "I meant everything I said to you, everything we shared. I just didn't tell you the whole truth." Lila's eyes filled with tears, and Ethan's heart sank. He braced himself for the worst, for her to tell him she never wanted to see him again. But instead, she surprised him. "I don't care about your money, Ethan," she said softly. "I never have. But what I do care about is honesty. If you're asking me to trust you, I need to know that you trust me too. Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. I do trust you, Lila. That's why I'm telling you everything now. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face for any sign of deception. Finally, she let out a small sigh and gave him a faint smile. I don't know what this means for us, Ethan. But I'm willing to find out. Ethan's heart soared. That's all I could ask for. As they stood there in the bustling diner, surrounded by the hum of ordinary life, Ethan realized that for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. But the journey wasn't over yet. There was still so much to discover about Lila, and so much more for him to give. Little did he know, the most heartwarming revelation was yet to come.